Fleet Commander Verk Jal stood on the bridge of the dreadnought Eternal Fury and watched the blue planet grow larger on the main screen. He had done this 100 times before with 100 different worlds, and it always ended the same way. The species below would panic and scramble and beg, and then they would burn or they would kneel. Those were the only two options the Drakfari Dominion ever offered. 12,000 warships had dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of this small, unremarkable star system. The fleet stretched across the void like a dark metal cloud, and every single vessel carried enough firepower to crack a continent in half. Verk had brought more than enough force to deal with one small civilization on one small world. The humans, as they called themselves, had only recently begun reaching beyond their own planet. They were primitive by galactic standards, barely capable of interstellar communication, and certainly not capable of standing against the might of an empire that ruled over 400 star systems. Verk clasped his clawed hands behind his back and waited for the familiar signals to arrive, the distress calls, the desperate transmissions, begging for mercy, the scrambling of whatever pitiful defense fleet these creatures had managed to assemble. He waited, and the seconds stretched into minutes, and the minutes stretched into something uncomfortable. Nothing came. His second-in-command, Torek, stepped forward and tilted his scaled head to one side. "Commander, there are no military vessels launching from the planet or from any orbital station in this system." Verk narrowed his eyes. "None at all." "None," Torek confirmed, and there was something in his voice that Verk did not like. "There are thousands of structures throughout this system on every moon and asteroid and orbital path, but none of them are broadcasting military signatures. They appear to be civilian infrastructure." Verk let out a slow breath through his teeth. He had seen cowardice before, and he had seen denial, but this felt like neither. This felt like something he could not name, and that bothered him more than any weapon could. Then the communication array chimed. A single vessel had appeared ahead of the fleet. It was small and white and curved like a river stone, and it carried no weapons and no shields. It simply floated there, calm and unhurried, as though 12,000 warships were nothing more than a mild inconvenience. The vessel broadcast a message on every frequency in every language the Drakfari used, and even in several they did not recognize. The message was clear and polite, and absolutely infuriating. "Welcome to Saul. You have been assigned case number 7741. D. A diplomatic representative will be with you shortly. Estimated wait time is 4 hours. Refreshments are available at Relay Station Gamma, located near the 4th planet. Thank you for your patience." The bridge went silent. Verk stared at the message on his screen and read it again. He had conquered civilizations that spanned entire star clusters. He had personally overseen the extinction of 2 species that had refused to submit. He had burned worlds until their oceans turned to steam and their skies turned black, and now he was being told to take a number and wait. "Destroy that vessel," he said quietly. Torek relayed the order, and 3 gunships fired in unison. The plasma bolts crossed the distance in less than a second and struck the white ship dead center and passed straight through it. Without resistance, the ship flickered once and then steadied and continued floating in place, broadcasting the same message on a loop. It was a hologram, a projection, not even a real ship. Verk felt something cold crawl up his spine, and he could see the same unease spreading across the faces of his bridge crew. They were warriors born and bred for conquest, trained from hatching to know that strength was the only truth in the universe. But strength required something to push against, and right now they were pushing against empty air. "Commander," Torek said slowly, "I am reading the energy output of this system, and the numbers are not making sense." "Explain." "The star at the center of this system appears to be partially enclosed in some kind of framework, a lattice of structures surrounding approximately 30% of the stellar surface. The energy being captured is beyond anything in our records. It exceeds the total output of the Dominion's core worlds combined by a factor of 900. Verk turned to look at him, That is not possible. I am reading it directly from our long-range sensors. Commander, the data is confirmed across all arrays. Verk looked back at the main screen at the small blue planet sitting quietly in the dark, surrounded by moons and stations and orbital rings, and the faint glittering web of something impossibly vast wrapped around its sun. He had expected to find a frightened young species huddled on a single world praying for salvation. Instead, he had found something else entirely, and he did not yet understand what it was. He opened a channel to the rest of the fleet. All ships hold position, no one fires without my direct command. There were murmurs of confusion from the other captains, but they obeyed. Verk was not the kind of commander who tolerated questions. He turned back to the screen and studied the blue world again. It looked peaceful and green and alive, and it radiated no hostility at all. And that was what frightened him the most. Every species the Dominion had ever encountered had responded to the arrival of the fleet with fear or aggression or both. Those were natural responses. Those were responses that made sense. This calm, indifferent politeness was something else entirely. Verk had spent his entire life in a universe that operated on one simple principle: the strong take, and the weak give. Everything he knew, every victory he had won, every empire he had crushed was built on that foundation. And now, he was standing at the edge of a star system that seemed to operate on a completely different principle, and he could not yet see what it was. But he could feel it. Something vast and quiet and patient was watching him from behind that blue sky, and it was not afraid. He pulled up the system scan one more time, and looked at the numbers again: the energy readings, the structures on every moon, the lattice around the sun, the thousands of stations scattered across the system like seeds in a garden. None of it was military, and all of it was beyond anything the Dominion had ever built. Tarek stepped closer and spoke in a low voice, meant only for Verk: "Commander, what are we dealing with?" Verk did not answer immediately. He stared at the holographic ship, still floating serenely in front of his fleet, broadcasting its polite little message about case numbers and wait times and refreshments. And for the first time in his long and bloody career, Fleet Commander Verk Jal felt something he had never felt before when looking at a planet he intended to conquer. He felt unsure. The bridge hummed with the quiet energy of a fleet waiting for orders. 12,000 warships hung in the darkness, ready to unleash devastation at a single word, and ahead of them, the blue planet turned slowly on its axis, utterly unconcerned. Verk lowered himself into his command chair and pressed his claws into the armrests and said nothing. The wait had begun. The 4 hours passed exactly as the message had promised, and not a minute sooner. Verk had spent the time packing his bridge, reviewing scans, and growing more irritated with each passing moment. His fleet had not moved, and the blue planet had not changed, and the holographic ship was still floating in front of them, broadcasting the same cheerful message on a loop. Several of his captains had requested permission to fire on orbital structures, or to send boarding parties to nearby stations. He had denied every request, because something in his gut told him to wait, and Verk had not survived 200 campaigns by ignoring his gut. When the shuttle finally arrived, it was even less impressive than the hologram. It was a small, boxy transport vessel, painted white with a single blue stripe along its side. It had no weapons and no escort, and no shields that the sensors could detect. It moved at a leisurely pace, as though the pilot was in no particular hurry, and docked gently with the Eternal Fury's port airlock, without even requesting permission. Tarek looked at Verk with wide eyes. "They just docked with us, Commander, without clearance." "I know," Verk said. "Let them aboard." The airlock opened, and a single human walked onto the bridge of the most powerful warship in the Drakfari fleet. She was small by Drakfari standards, barely reaching the chest height of the shortest officer on the bridge. She had dark brown skin and short gray hair, and she wore a simple blue jacket with no armor and no rank insignia. She carried a flat rectangular device in one hand and a metal container in the other, and she looked around the bridge with the calm, interested expression of someone visiting a museum. "Good morning," she said in perfectly accented Drakfari. "My name is Dr. Lena Akafer, and I have been assigned as your diplomatic representative. I apologize for the wait. We had a situation with a trade delegation from the Pelori cluster, and it ran a little over schedule." Verk stared at her, and the bridge crew stared at her, and nobody spoke for several seconds. "You speak our language," Verk finally said. "Of course," Lena replied. "We have been studying your civilization for approximately 300 years. We are quite familiar with your language, your history, your biology, and your cultural practices." She smiled warmly. "It is genuinely wonderful to finally meet you in person." Verk felt his jaw tighten. "You have been watching us for 300 years. "Studying," Lena corrected gently. "Not watching. There is an important difference. We wanted to be prepared when you eventually arrived." She set the metal container down on a nearby console and opened it, and the smell of something warm and fragrant filled the bridge. "I brought tea. I was not sure if you would enjoy it, but many species find it pleasant. Would anyone like some?" Nobody moved. Lena shrugged and poured herself a cup and took a slow sip, and then looked at Verk with patient, expectant eyes, as though she had all the time in the universe. Verk decided to stop being polite. "I am Fleet Commander Verk Jal of the Drakfari Dominion," he said, and his voice carried the weight of authority that had made entire civilizations collapse. "I command 12,000 warships, and I have the power to reduce your world to ash within the hour. You will surrender your planet, your resources, and your population to the Dominion, or you will be destroyed. Those are the only options available to you." Lena nodded and tapped something on her flat device. "I understand, and I appreciate you being direct. Let me walk you through why that will not work. Do you mind if I use your main screen?" Before Verk could respond, the main view screen changed, and a presentation appeared with clean, simple graphics and text in both human and Drakfari script. The title read, "First Contact Response Protocol, Briefing 7741. "You have a protocol for this," Torek said from behind Verk. "We have a protocol for everything," Lena said cheerfully. "Now if you will look at the first section, I want to explain a bit about Earth's current defensive posture." She tapped her device, and the screen changed to show a timeline. Approximately 80 years ago, Earth made the decision to completely dismantle its military fleet. This was not done out of weakness or pacifism. It was done because we determined that traditional military vessels were redundant given our technological capabilities. She looked at Verk. "In simple terms, we stopped building warships because we no longer needed them." Verk let out a low, rumbling laugh. "You disarmed yourselves, and you expect me to believe that was a position of strength." "I do not expect you to believe anything yet," Lena said. "That is why I brought visual aids." She tapped the screen again. "In the last 200 years, 14 alien fleets have entered the Sol system with hostile intent. Yours is the 15th. Not a single one of them fired a shot." She let that sink in, and then she continued. "I have contact information for 3 of those civilizations. If you would like references, the Moravi hegemony was particularly aggressive when they arrived. And now, they are one of our closest trading partners. Their ambassador plays chess with our Secretary General every Thursday." Verk did not laugh this time. The number 14 stuck in his mind like a blade. 14 fleets, 14 hostile civilizations. All of them stopped without a fight. "You are bluffing," he said, but the certainty in his voice had weakened. "I understand why you might think that," Lena said. "Would you like a demonstration?" Verk stared at her for a long moment, and then he nodded slowly. "Fire 1 orbital bombardment at an uninhabited target, one of the moons of the 5th planet. No lives will be lost, and we will see what your system does in response." Lena considered this and then nodded. "That seems reasonable. Go ahead." Verk gave the order, and a single heavy cruiser powered its main cannon, and fired a concentrated plasma beam at one of Jupiter's barren moons. The beam crossed millions of kilometers in seconds and struck the surface with enough force to crack the crust of a small planet. The moon absorbed it. The surface glowed bright white for a moment, and then the energy rippled outward and was channeled through a network of conduits buried beneath the rock, and the energy traveled along a visible path to a nearby construction array. And the array hummed to life and began assembling a new space station right before their eyes, using the energy from the bombardment as its power source. The bridge went completely silent. Lena took another sip of her tea and looked at the screen with a satisfied expression. "Thank you for that. We were about 2 weeks behind schedule on Station Gamma 19, and you just gave us exactly the energy boost we needed." Verk sat down slowly in his command chair. He looked at the small human woman standing on his bridge, holding her cup of tea and her flat device and her calm, unshakable smile. And he understood for the first time that this was not a bluff, and this was not a trick. These people had not sent warships because warships were beneath them. They had turned their entire star system into something the Dominion did not have a word for, something beyond a fortress, and beyond a weapon, and beyond anything Verk had encountered in his long career of conquest. And the woman standing in front of him drinking tea and showing slides was not afraid of him at all. Not even a little. Lena set down her cup and smiled at him again. "Shall I continue with the presentation, or would you like to take a short break? I find these briefings can be a lot to absorb all at once." Verk looked at her, and then at the screen still showing the new station being built from the energy of his own weapons, and then back at her. "Continue," he said quietly. And Lena did. Verk did not sleep that night, and he had not slept the night before either. After Lena finished her presentation, she had returned to her shuttle and departed with the same unhurried calm with which she had arrived. She left behind a data package containing everything she had discussed, along with additional reading materials and a recipe for the tea she had been drinking in case anyone wanted to try making it themselves. Verk had ignored the recipe, but he had not ignored the data. He spent hours going through it, and then he sent out scout ships because he did not trust data provided by an enemy, and he needed to see the truth for himself. He dispatched 12 stealth corvettes to different parts of the Sol system, with orders to observe and report, and to avoid contact with any human structures. The reports came back one by one, and each one was worse than the last. The first corvette surveyed the sun, and confirmed what the long-range scans had already suggested: the star was partially enclosed in a vast lattice of interconnected structures that the humans called a Dyson framework. It was not a complete sphere, but it did not need to be even at 30% coverage. It was harvesting more energy than the entire Drakthari Dominion produced across all 400 of its star systems. Combined, the framework was elegant and self-repairing, and it adjusted real-time to fluctuations in solar output as though it were alive. The second corvette scanned the asteroid belt between the 4th and 5th planets, and what it found made the pilot's voice shake. When he delivered his report, the belt was gone. In its place was a distributed supercomputer made up of millions of linked processing nodes spread across the orbital path, where the rocks had once been. The computational power was so vast that the corvette's onboard systems could not even calculate it. The number exceeded every scale the Drakthari used to measure such things. The third corvette approached Earth itself, and this was the report that kept Verk awake. Earth was green and blue and beautiful, and it radiated no military energy of any kind. There were no orbital defense platforms, and no planetary shields, and no weapon systems of any sort. The surface was covered in forests and rivers and cities that blended so seamlessly with the natural landscape that it was hard to tell where civilization ended and wilderness began. But the corvette's deep sensors told a different story. Every molecule of the planet's atmosphere was monitored and maintained by systems so sophisticated that they appeared to be part of the natural weather patterns themselves. The oceans were regulated to the degree, and the soil composition was managed down to the mineral content of individual regions. The entire planet was not just inhabited, but actively maintained like a garden, tended by an impossibly careful hand. The humans had not just built a civilization on their world, they had turned their world into a machine, so advanced it looked like nature. The fourth corvette reported on the moons of the outer planets. Every single one had been converted into something useful: mining stations, on some research facilities, on others manufacturing centers, and energy relays and communication hubs, all connected by a network of transit corridors that allowed materials and people to move across the entire system in minutes. The fifth corvette found something even more unsettling. Tucked behind the eighth planet was a facility that appeared to be a biological research center. The corvette's sensors detected stored genetic information for over 9 million species from across the galaxy, including the Drakvhari. The humans had samples of Drakvhari DNA, and they had been studying it for centuries. Verk read that report 3 times. The sixth corvette made a mistake. Its pilot, a young officer named Keth, decided on his own initiative to attempt sabotage on a small relay station orbiting one of Saturn's moons. He reasoned that if he could disable even one node, it would prove the system had weaknesses, and that the humans were not as untouchable as they appeared. Keth docked with the relay station and planted an explosive charge and detonated it. The station did not break. Instead, it rearranged itself around the corvette like a living thing. The damaged section rebuilt in seconds using materials that seemed to flow like liquid metal, and then solidified into new configurations. The corvette was gently enclosed in a pocket of the station's structure, held firmly, but without damage, and a polite automated message played on the cockpit speakers. "You have entered a restricted maintenance zone. Your vessel has been secured for your safety. A service team has been notified and will arrive within 6 hours. Please remain calm. Complimentary entertainment options are available on Channel 4. Keth sat in his trapped corvette for 6 hours watching human comedy programs on his cockpit screen, until a small repair shuttle arrived and freed him without a word of anger or accusation. They simply released his ship, patched the scorch mark he had left on the station, and sent him on his way with a friendly wave. When Keth reported back to Verk, he could not look his commander in the eye. Verk dismissed him and sat alone in his quarters, and stared at the wall and thought about everything he had learned. The humans did not have warships because they did not need warships. Everything in their system was a weapon if they chose to use it that way. The Dyson framework could focus a beam of stellar energy that would vaporize his entire fleet in a fraction of a second. The asteroid supercomputer could hack every system on every ship in the Dominion simultaneously. The atmospheric processors on Earth could manufacture biological agents tailored to any species in hours. The relay stations could trap and hold any vessel that came near them. And they chose not to do any of it. They chose tea and presentations and comedy programs and polite automated messages. That was what terrified Verk most of all. It was not the power itself, because he understood power. He had wielded it his entire life. What he did not understand was restraint on this scale. These creatures had the ability to rule the galaxy, and they had simply decided not to. He opened a secure channel to Lena's shuttle, which was still parked at a nearby relay station, waiting patiently. "Dr. Akefer," he said. "Commander Jal," she replied warmly. "How can I help you?" "I have a question." "Of course." He paused, and the silence stretched between them across the cold void of space. "Why?" he asked. "You could conquer everything. You could rule every civilization in the galaxy without resistance. Why do you not?" Lena was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke her voice was softer than before. "We tried that once," she said. "On our own world with each other we spent thousands of years conquering and ruling and taking, and it nearly destroyed us. We came within a hair's width of ending our own species. Not once, but several times we burned our own skis, and poisoned our own oceans, and split the atom and pointed it at ourselves." She paused. "And then we stopped, and we looked at what we had done, and we decided to try something else, something that required more strength than conquest ever did." Verk leaned forward. "What?" "Patience," Lena said. "We chose patience." The channel went quiet, and Verk sat in the dark of his quarters and thought about a species that had almost killed itself and had chosen instead to become something the galaxy had never seen before. And he began to wonder if perhaps the Dominion had been doing it wrong all along. Verk made his report to the Dominion High Council 3 days after his conversation with Lena, and he held nothing back. He told them about the Dyson framework and the asteroid supercomputer and the self-repairing stations and the biological research facility and the energy absorption and the gentle trapping of his scout ship. He told them about the 14 other fleets that had come before and left without firing a shot. He told them about the small human woman who had walked onto his bridge with a cup of tea and a slideshow and had not been afraid of 12,000 warships. He told them the truth because Verk was many things, but he was not a liar. The High Council chamber on the Dominion homeworld was a vast dark hall carved from volcanic stone, where the 12 ruling lords sat in a semicircle of obsidian thrones. Their faces appeared on Verk's screen as flickering holographic projections, and he could see the divide forming before he even finished speaking. 6 of the lords listened with growing unease, and their silence told Verk that they understood what he was saying. They grasped the implications, and they were afraid. The other 6 did not listen at all. War Admiral Saithra was the loudest among them. She was a tall, sharp-featured Drakthari, with scars running down both sides of her face, and she had risen to her rank by being the most aggressive and most ruthless commander the Dominion had produced in a generation. She had personally led the siege of the Vorathi homeworld, and had watched their cities burn from orbit without flinching. She did not believe in restraint, and she did not believe in fear, and she certainly did not believe that a species that had disarmed itself could pose any threat to the Dominion. "You have been deceived, Verk," she said, and her voice cut through the chamber like a blade. "These humans are clever, I will grant you that, much cleverer than the usual prey, but they are still prey. They have no fleet and no weapons, and all your talk of energy frameworks and supercomputers is nothing more than elaborate theater designed to make you hesitate." "It is not theater," Verk said firmly. "I have seen it with my own sensors. I have verified the data independently." "You have verified what they wanted you to verify," Saithra shot back. "They showed you power because they wanted you to be afraid, and it worked. You are sitting in orbit around their world with 12,000 ships, and you are doing nothing. You are a disgrace to the rank you hold." The chamber erupted in argument, half the lords shouting at the other half. Verk stood rigid on his bridge and watched the chaos unfold on his screen and felt the situation slipping away from him. When the noise died down, Saithra spoke again, and this time her voice was cold and final. "I am dispatching a secondary fleet, 40,000 warships, including 12 planet-cracking dreadnoughts of the Worldbreaker class. We will arrive at Sol in 9 days, and we will do what Verk was too cowardly to do. We will reduce that planet to rubble, and we will harvest whatever technology survives, and we will add it to the Dominion's arsenal." Several lords nodded in agreement. Verk leaned toward his screen. "Admiral, you do not understand what you are walking into. I am telling you, as someone who has served the Dominion for over 60 years, that this is a mistake. These beings are not what we have faced before." Saithra smiled, and it was not a kind smile. "Then they will be the most interesting thing I have burned." The transmission ended, and Verk stood alone on his bridge. Tarek was the first to speak. "Commander, what do we do?" Verk did not answer immediately. He walked to the main view screen and looked out at the Sol system. The blue planet turned slowly below them, and the stars were bright, and the faint glimmer of the Dyson framework caught the light of the sun like a web of silver thread. He thought about his career, and the worlds he had conquered, and the civilizations he had broken. He thought about the smoking Rui. Ines he had left behind on a dozen planets, and the species that no longer existed, because he had followed orders without question. He thought about what Lena had said about patience, and about choosing something harder than conquest. And then he thought about Sathra's 40,000 ships, with their planet-cracking weapons, pointed at a world of people who had chosen not to build guns. He opened a channel to Lena. "Dr. Akefer," he said. "Commander," she replied, and she sounded as calm as ever, as though she had been expecting his call. "A second fleet is coming, 40,000 ships. They carry world-breaker-class weapons capable of cracking a planet's core. They will arrive in 9 days, and their commander intends to destroy Earth." There was a brief pause on the other end. "We know," Lena said. Verk blinked. "You know. We detected the quantum relay transmission. The moment it was sent, we have already analyzed Admiral Sathra's fleet composition, and calculated her approach vector, and estimated arrival time. Our current projection is 8 days and 17 hours. Verk gripped the edge of his console. "And you are not concerned?" "We have made arrangements," Lena said, and there was something in her voice that was warm and calm and absolutely unshakable. "We have been making arrangements for 300 years, Commander. This is what we do." Verk stood there for a long moment, and the weight of his decision pressed down on him like gravity. He could feel his officers watching him, waiting for orders. He could feel the pull of loyalty to the Dominion, the institution that had raised him and trained him, and given him everything he had. And he could feel something else pulling him in a different direction, something quieter and harder to name. He straightened his back and opened a fleet-wide channel to all 12,000 of his ships. "All vessels stand down, power down weapons, and hold position. No ship in this fleet will fire on any human target or any human structure. That is a direct order from your fleet commander. Any captain who disobeys will answer to me personally." The channel erupted with voices, some confused, some angry, some afraid. But Verk was not finished. He opened a second channel, aimed directly at the approaching fleet, on Sathra's command frequency. "Admiral Sathra, this is Fleet Commander Verk Jal. I am ordering you to turn your fleet around and return to Dominion space. Do not enter the Sol system. Do not engage the humans. This is not a request." The response came back almost immediately, and Sathra's voice was sharp with contempt. "You do not have the authority to give me orders, Verk. You have been relieved of command by the High Council. Stand aside, or be destroyed along with the humans." The channel went dead. Verk lowered his hand from the console and looked at Torek, and his second-in-command looked back at him with wide, uncertain eyes. "Commander," Torek said quietly, "what have you done?" Verk looked out at the blue planet one more time and took a slow breath. "Something I should have done a long time ago," he said. He sat down in his command chair and clasped his hands together and waited. He had no weapons powered and no battle plan and no idea what was going to happen when Sathra arrived with enough firepower to crack a world in half. But he had made his choice, and for the first time in 60 years, it felt like the right one. The second fleet arrived 8 days and 17 hours later, exactly as Lena had predicted. Verk watched from his bridge as 40,000 Drakvhari warships poured out of faster-than-light travel and filled the darkness around the Sol system like a swarm of iron locusts. They were arranged in full assault formation, with the 12 world-breaker dreadnoughts positioned at the center of the fleet like fists, waiting to strike. Each one of those dreadnoughts carried a core lance capable of punching through a planet's mantle and detonating its molten heart from the inside. Admiral Sathra's flagship, the Unbroken, will took position at the head of the formation, and her voice rang out across every channel. "People of Earth, this is War Admiral Sathra of the Drakvhari Dominion. You have 1 minute to surrender your world, and everything in it. Failure to comply will result in total annihilation. This is your only warning." The Sol system was quiet. No response came from Earth, no ships launched, no shields activated. The blue planet continued to turn slowly in the light of its sun, wrapped in clouds and green continents, and the gentle silver threads of the Dyson framework. Saithra waited for 30 seconds, and then she smiled. "Begin charging the core lances," she ordered. On the bridge of the Eternal Fury, Verk stood with his hands at his sides and watched the World-Breaker dreadnoughts power up their weapons. The energy readings climbed higher and higher, until the sensors struggled to display them. These were weapons that had ended entire species, and they were now pointed at a world of people who drank tea and made presentations and played comedy programs for captured scouts. And then everything changed. Every screen on every ship in Saithra's fleet went dark at the same moment. Every console, every display, every holographic projection, every personal device carried by every soldier in the entire 40,000 ship armada, all of it went black simultaneously, as though someone had reached into the fleet and turned off the lights. For 3 seconds there was nothing but darkness and silence and the hum of engines. Then the screens came back on. But they were not showing fleet data anymore. Every single screen in the fleet was now displaying the same thing, a simulation, rendered in perfect detail, running in real time, showing exactly what would happen if Saithra fired her weapons. The asteroid supercomputer had modeled every possible outcome of the engagement. It had calculated every variable, every weapon's trajectory, every shield frequency, every structural weakness of every ship in the Drakfari fleet. And it was now showing the results to every officer and every soldier and every gunner and every engineer in Saithra's command. The simulations played out in thousands of variations. In one, the Dyson framework redirected a focused beam of stellar energy that swept across the fleet like a blade of light, and every ship evaporated in less than 2 seconds. In another, the relay stations generated a gravitational pulse that collapsed every vessel into a point the size of a grain of sand. In another, the supercomputer simply reached into the fleet's own systems and shut them down, remotely turning off engines and weapons and life support with the casual ease of someone closing a book. In another, nanoscale machines appeared inside the hulls of every ship and disassembled them molecule by molecule so quickly that the crews would not have had time to scream. In every single simulation, the Drakfari fleet was neutralized in under 9 seconds. In none of them did a single human die. The simulations kept playing, cycling through hundreds of scenarios, each one more devastating and more effortless than the last, and every crew member in the fleet watched in frozen silence as they saw their own destruction played out before their eyes with the cold precision of a mathematical proof. On the bridge of the Unbroken Will, Admiral Saithra stood rigid and stared at her main screen, and for the first time in her life, she had nothing to say. Her weapons officers sat at their consoles with their hands in their laps. Their fingers did not move toward the firing controls. Their faces were pale, and their eyes were wide, and several of them were trembling. One of them, a young gunner barely old enough to serve, whispered something that carried across the silent bridge. "They are not even afraid of us." Saithra turned to look at him, and she saw the truth of it written on his face, and on the faces of every officer on her bridge. These were warriors who had burned worlds, and they were looking at a species that could unmake them without effort, and they understood at last what Verk had tried to tell them. This was not a civilization that had failed to build weapons. This was a civilization that had moved beyond them. The screens flickered one more time, and then a new image appeared, a human face, warm and calm and familiar. Lena Akafer looked out from every screen in both fleets, and she spoke in perfect Drakfari, and her voice was gentle. "We do not want to destroy you," she said. "We have never wanted that. We did not build these systems to wage war. We built them to make war unnecessary, and we have been waiting for you for a very long time." She paused, and the silence was absolute across 52,000 ships. We have prepared something for your people. We have trade agreements that will double the resource output of your core worlds within a decade. We have technology-sharing frameworks that will advance your engineering by centuries. We have cultural exchange programs and educational partnerships and medical research that we have been developing specifically for the Drakthari for over 300 years. The screens changed again, and data began scrolling across every console in the fleet, detailed technical specifications and trade proposals, and medical research reports and blueprints for technologies the Dominion had never imagined. And on Saithra's personal screen, separated from the rest, displayed privately for her eyes alone, was something else. A medical file. It contained a complete analysis of a disease called the wasting plague, a degenerative condition that had ravaged the Drakthari for generations, killing millions slowly and painfully. The file contained not just research, and not just analysis, but a cure, a complete verified, tested cure ready for immediate production and distribution. Saithra stared at the file and her breath caught in her throat, because the wasting plague had taken her daughter from her. 11 years ago, her little girl had withered away over the course of 6 months, and Saithra had held her hand at the end, and had felt her go still and cold, and had carried that grief like a stone in her chest ever since. And these humans had cured it. They had cured it, and they had been waiting to share it, and they had put it on her personal screen, because they knew about her daughter. They had known all along. Saithra's hand moved to the weapons console and hovered there for a moment, and then she pulled it back and pressed it flat against the surface and lowered her head. "Power down all weapons," she said, and her voice was rough and quiet. The bridge crew obeyed without a word. Across the fleet, ship after ship went dark as weapons systems shut down and engines dropped to idle, and the great armada of the Drakthari Dominion went still and silent in the light of an alien sun. Verk watched from his bridge and felt something release in his chest, something tight and heavy that he had been carrying for longer than he could remember. He opened a channel to Lena. "You could have shown us all of this from the beginning," he said. "The power and the cures and the offers, you could have led with this. Why did you wait? Why did you let us threaten and posture and send a second fleet?" Lena smiled, and it was the same warm, patient smile she had worn since the first moment she stepped onto his bridge. "Because if we had shown you our power first, you would have called it a threat. We needed you to come to it on your own. We needed you to see it not as a weapon pointed at you, but as an answer offered to you. There is a difference between being forced to kneel and being invited to stand, and we wanted to give you the chance to stand." Verk closed his eyes and let out a long, slow breath. Behind him, Torek spoke softly. "Commander, the human relay stations are broadcasting a message to both fleets." "What does it say?" Torek read it aloud, and his voice carried a note of wonder that Verk had never heard from him before. "Welcome to Sol. Refreshments are available at Relay Station. Gamma, diplomatic representatives, will be assigned to each vessel in your fleet shortly. Estimated wait time is 2 hours. We are glad you are here." Verk opened his eyes and looked out at the blue planet turning quietly in the dark, surrounded by silver threads of light, and ringed by moons and stations, and the vast, patient architecture of a species that had looked at the universe and all its violence, and had decided to become something else. 50 years from now, he would walk through the green parks of that planet as an old man, serving as an ambassador to the world that had changed everything. And when new alien fleets arrived, as they always did, it would be Verk who greeted them on the white holographic ship. His opening line, borrowed from a small woman with gray hair and a thermos of tea, would never change. "Welcome to Sol. You have been assigned a case number.